Thank you.
Here we go.
Wow, those lights are challenging. They are. I like to look at my audience. When
Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm Corinne Zola. I'm just honored and feel so lucky to be here today. I'm a mom of two, and I am a founder of the Westchester Children's Museum, which opened 2 years ago. I got together with several moms, basically, mostly moms, around the kitchen table because we felt that there was a void in our community of a place where all of us, there's something like 500,000 kids in the Westchester region, didn't have a place to go for enriching experiences that they could share together and see each other. It's a very diverse community of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. The Children's Museum is a place where we welcome everybody to come, where they are encouraged to take risks, to build critical thinking skills, problem solve, and collaborate, which is why this panel in particular means so much to me, because I think what we're doing is trying to help kids learn to be lifelong learners and be confident, collaborative adults. And so excited about our panel participants. Each of you brings such a unique sensibility and bring professional experience and personal experience to this question. So I've talked to people in out today, attendees, about what they think it means to be at home in the world. Everyone has a little different answer, so we're going to try to have a conversation. I have specific questions for each of you, but feel free to jump in where you think it's appropriate. And we're going to try to come away today, wrap up all the things we've heard today at the other panels with some real tips and advice about what parents can do to help their kids be at home in the world. So with that said, maybe I'm like you each to introduce yourself. I'm going to ask a question to the group, and then if you could introduce yourself first and then try to answer it. My first question, I'm sure all of you struggle with what I'm about to ask. I particularly have been, especially in the last few weeks, the last year, last 2 years really. How do you reconcile what we see in the world with teaching our children to be kind, respectful of each other, honest? And how do you talk to them about these being valuable qualities?
I'll start.
Okay.
How are you?
Good.
Good. My name's Christopher Albrecht. I am a husband. I have 3 children in college. I teach in Brockport, New York, 4th grade. I'm the 2018 New York State Teacher of the Year. And thank you. I love the word kindness. It brings such a good vibe to all of us. But the question is, how do we get to that place of kindness? And it's a great question right there. I personally think the path to peace and kindness is through serving one another. Service is something that you can't quantify. You can't take a state test on how much service do you do. And nowadays we have we have clubs that do community service hours. But is that truly living a life of serving one another? When we relegate ourselves to, I've served 8 hours, are you living a life of service, or are you living a life of a checklist? So I think we need to go back to those great, great values of teaching to look at each other and the person next to you, to your left and your right, and teaching those values of serving one another to produce kindness. And it needs to be done at school. But that communication needs to happen between school and home so there's uniformity between the two.
Thanks. Dr. Wilborn, yeah.
Sure. So, first of all, how y'all doing?
Good.
How y'all doing?
Great.
Yay. Just want to see if y'all are still up and with us. So my name is Dr. Tammy Lewis Wilborn. I am a board-certified licensed professional counselor. I'm also a visiting assistant professor at the University of New Orleans. So my students are folks who think they want to save the world through mental health counseling, either as school counselors or clinical mental health counselors. And I'm also the owner and chief clinical officer of Wilborn Clinical Services, which is a solo practice in New Orleans that provides clinical mental health counseling, wellness coaching, clinical supervision, and we also host wellness events. And one of the events that we founded in 2016 was the Black Women's Wellness Conference, which promotes mental health and wellness in Black women. And that work was an extension of my doctoral research, looking at Black women's work experiences with race and gender stereotypes in the workplace. So that's what I do.
What about,
answer
you
that.
talk about?
I'm sorry, I got so caught up in
Yeah.
the minutia of bios. So I think, particularly as a clinician, one of the things that I think I've recognized is helping parents to understand that if you want children who are kind and you want them to be respectful and you want them to be honest, you need to be that. And I think many of you have heard today from several people a similar message, that we need to be models for the type of children we want to see. I think that's first and foremost. I think the other thing is, related to that, the world is scary. And as a clinician, I get that as caregivers and as parents, we want to sort of shield our children from the world that's scary. Unfortunately, I think when we do that, we don't prepare them with the tools to manage what it looks like to be in a scary world. So I think related to that modeling of honesty, we need to be able to talk with our kids in ways that are developmentally appropriate in helping them to understand how to navigate that world. I think the last thing related to sort of actionable steps in terms of modeling, I think one skill in particular comes to mind, and that is perspective taking. And really, when I'm talking about that, what I'm talking about is, children are kind of egocentric. Wouldn't you all kind of agree that? Y'all laughing, so y'all must know what I'm talking about. They kind of focus on themselves, right? And so I think teaching children that they actually impact others, the behaviors that they engage in, the words that they say to other people, have an impact. And so I think teaching children that their actions impact other people facilitates empathy. It facilitates that, what Christopher was talking about earlier, that sort of notion of service, right? Seeing other people and seeing yourself in service to others. So I would say perspective taking is certainly an important tool for kids to have.
I love that.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bernstein, and I am a mother of 6. And my once boyfriend, now husband, and I started a toy company, Melissa and Doug, 30 years ago. So.
Yeah.
And I'm usually in a dark lair creating toys, so up on a stage with bright lights is really not my home. So I apologize for any stammering that you hear going forward. In terms of teaching kindness and respect, I think you can only think kindly and respectfully toward others when you think kindly and respectfully toward yourself. And I think a lot of the hatred in the world comes from the fact that as individuals, many people hate themselves. And I think we have a crisis in mental health right now with people not feeling confident, not feeling good about themselves, not understanding who they are versus the other. And, I don't have all the answers, but I do know we should start in our own homes and making our own children feel confident and respected and loved, and allow them, which we'll talk about, to play more, which will help them really define who they are. And I think only then can they learn to truly respect others.
I'm Andrea Beatty, and I'm the author of Rosie Revere Engineer, Ada Twist Scientist, and Iggy Peck, Iggy Peck Architect, which now is collectively called The Questionnaires, and some other books. And so that's what I do. And I think the answer to how do we help kids be out there and connect and really feel a part of the world is that it's through modeling the behavior and also empathy. Kids like to be with us as parents. They want to be with us and they want to be like us. So if they see us being engaged, if they see us being, focusing on a bigger world than ourselves, that rings a bell with them. That's an important thing. They may not recognize it immediately, but over time that is a thing. And the other thing is empathy, and that's where books are so incredibly vital, because books are like little empathy machines. When you read a book, you become the characters in those stories. You see the world through that character's eyes, and that can be someone who is like you in many ways, but also completely opposite of you, or from a foreign place, or from, you know, just a different background. And suddenly, when you make that connection, and for children, especially young children, well, not just especially, but for children, that is a real and tangible and permanent thing. When they see other people in the world as just like themselves in whatever ways, suddenly you can't hate someone who is just like you, if you do come from a place where you like yourself, which is also a key. But you can look at them and go, oh, he's just like me. I know that we can work together. I know that we can be friends. I don't hate you because you're different, because we both like to build things, or we both like to ask questions, or whatever the thing the kid does. So books, always books. Yeah.
Thank you.
Always.
So I want to ask my next question to Christopher. I'm fascinated by the fact you're a fourth grade teacher, right? You're the primary teacher for these kids for most of the day, of their school day. So I'm always fascinated by the fact that the teacher spends so much time with your kid, or maybe more time than you do over the course of a day. So given that, you have a very unique perspective into how kids interact, how they're behaving when you're not around. So how do you, as a teacher, teach your students to be listeners, be diplomatic, and have sound judgment, I guess, in the face of adversity or disappointment or disagreement?
Sure, that's a great question. First off, all the prize money I won this year went to books. I've been visiting schools throughout the whole state of New York and been giving out books. So I've been in 70 different schools, and you'll be happy to say I love reading too. So it's wonderful.
It is the thing.
The question that you're asking right there, when we come to face with a child, every child's unique. And that's such an important thing to realize. My classroom, I work with 40 children, and of those 40, there's 14 of them that have individualized education plans, okay? So there's special education. I question that notion. I would like to see every child getting a special education, wouldn't you? Isn't all those 40 kids entitled, every one of them's entitled to something special and unique to them. So they all come with their own talents, they all come with their own challenges, but we need to be working on all of those things, right? So it takes a tremendous amount of time to get my class ready. I think that when we look at the world and preparing children, we need to help them believe in themselves. We really do, and I think that's a common, fluid message going across to all four of us, is we need to find self-belief. One of the challenges that we're seeing right now is when people don't believe in themselves and face adversity, they have fear. And we all know that fear leads to anger. And that's something we don't want to see in our populations. So as we start working with children, let's produce a generation where we help them believe in themselves and capitalize on those strengths right there. Likewise, I would say that starting to teach children to tackle things in an unconventional way. We call it rule breaking, but not like breaking the law kind of rule breaking, but more rule breaking of breaking the unconventional, breaking into unconventional areas of thought and not worrying about failing. I have the greatest concern right now, not with some of the kids that struggle at school, but sometimes the kids that don't struggle at school, because what ends up happening is they have such an easy time going through, and they never face failure. And when do they face failure for the first time? Maybe in college, when mom and dad aren't there, or a loving family member's not there, and a teacher's not there. So we really need to be challenging every child on the level that they're at to prepare them correctly for this world. And if we don't, what ends up happening is we face a challenge, we fall flat on our face and don't know how to deal with that challenge right there. So we really need to prepare kids, not just for success, but for failure, or let's not maybe call it failure, but for mistakes, right?
So, like, Dr. Wilborn, based on what Christopher is just saying, what do you think about that and preparing for failure? And also, if a kid is, and Christopher also, if they're facing disagreements with each other, how do you diffuse a situation? How do you have a child address adversity?
One thing I appreciate your perspective as an educator. I was actually having a conversation with another speaker last night. She and I shared that our children have special needs. My 7-year-old son is diagnosed with autism and has an IEP plan. And we were sort of talking about, while having an IEP plan is helpful for children with special needs, how valuable it would be to have an individualized education plan that sort of meets the needs of children, recognizing that all children are unique, period, right? And really valuing uniqueness in children. And so I really appreciate you from the perspective that you sit, recognizing that we should, as parents, as caregivers, as interested stakeholders, really value and applaud and celebrate uniqueness in children. I think oftentimes what happens is that we want to sort of suppress the uniqueness, or we may be embarrassed, or whatever the case is, and a lot of that then I think leads to shame, and shame is dangerous. Shame is a dangerous thing, and I think a lot of young people go through their lives having experienced shame because somebody missed the opportunity to celebrate them uniquely as they are.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a great lead into a question I have for you, which is your kids, your characters are kids who are big thinkers. They're a little different. They're out of the box. But I noticed, and I think based on the applause, everyone knows your characters, but you can talk about who they are. But the adults in their life, the parents or the teacher, they kind of seem to want to make them be a little more conventional, put them back in the box a little bit. So maybe you could talk a little bit about modeling or encouraging imagination or out-of-the-box behavior and thinking.
Sure. So my characters are Iggy Peck, architect, and Iggy builds out of anything. He begins his life building a tower in only an hour with nothing but diapers and glue, which the diapers aren't clean, so that does cause some issues. Don't try that at home. Clearly he's a kid who is focused on doing the thing that he loves and his passion. And every kid is passionate. Every kid is so into the thing that they're into. And that is often to the exclusion of, what we want for them to be doing right now. We don't want them to be building towers out of the soup cans in the kitchen because we're trying to make dinner or we're doing whatever. Ada Twist is a kid who is totally curious, and she is consumed with questions. And she is a scientist by nature because she just has to know everything. That unfortunately leads her to draw on the wall in the living room because she's thinking and she's again kind of zoned out to what's expected of her, which is not to be drawing on the wall. But she can't help it. She is consumed with curiosity, and every kid is consumed with curiosity. That's who they are. They are curious beings. So I think the trick as a parent or an educator is to be able to recognize that a kid isn't necessarily doing something out of a bad motive. They are just doing it because they just have to. They have to know. They want to figure things out, and they're smart, and they're capable, and they can. So the trick is to kind of try to get in front of that and steer it as much as you can. And you can't always. So that's when you have to kind of go along with it and figure out how to, okay, we had a big failure. How do we pick up from that and proceed? But if you can get ahead of it, so for instance, like in the books, the parents, and it's an old trope that in kids' books, the character has to be the one that does all the growing and changing. I find that's usually not the case in my books. It's the adults who've got to get with the program. We're way behind it. But the parents do kind of figure it out. And the idea of giving a kid a more structured or directed way to explore the thing they're interested in. So for instance, there's this marvelous stuff, this whiteboard, you can buy it on rolls, and you can stick it on your hallway. Mm-hmm. It's just this thin whiteboard stuff, and you get the markers. Give kids a place to express their questions and your questions. Because again, modeling that I'm curious and I'm thinking about things, That is the most empowering thing for a kid. When a kid can recognize that the adult doesn't have necessarily all the answers, but also has questions, suddenly it becomes this partnership of exploration. And so you both put your questions out there, or you have a bucket on the table. This is the question bucket. I have questions today. I don't know about why is the sky blue. I don't know, let's find out. And so you take the kids and you explore things together. And that again is where books come in. And I the quality, the quantity, the breadth of children's books now, there's never been anything like it. But people don't always know where and how to find the best books. Libraries, absolutely amazing, fantastic. Get to know your youth librarian at your local library. Go to an independent bookstore. They know every book that comes out. They know what's coming out for the next year, and they can help you find whatever the thing is that your kid is so into. Help figure out what is that, and then you can direct it and have a little less chaos, maybe. There's a marvelous website called amightygirl.com. I always like to mention them because their charter is sort of to promote empowering books and movies and things for girls, but in fact, it's just one of the best curated sites for kids' books for any kid. amightygirl.com. They are fantastic, and they keep up again with the new books.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, it is a constantly changing landscape, and there are so many fantastic books.
I think that leads to asking Melissa about toys.
Yes.
I mean, first let me just say, Melissa and Doug Toys, my shelves are full, like as I'm sure everybody here, full of your toys and puzzles and art kits. So it's just really nice to meet you. But based on what Andrea's saying, with books, maybe you could talk a little bit about the power of play and the vision of your toy company and how this ties in.
So unfortunately, many of today's parents don't really appreciate the importance of play. And I think it's because free time today seems like a waste. And we are looking for activities that can build skills that can go on a resume. And unfortunately, play doesn't go on a resume. So we put our kids in activities that we think will build these incredible skills and will allow them to be more successful and potentially get into an elite university. But the tragic thing is that play actually builds more skills than any scheduled activity you could ever imagine. Play builds social, emotional, cognitive, language, and self-regulation skills that are essential to thrive in the world. And through play, literally, you learn to take risks, to experiment, to explore, to be curious, to test boundaries, and mostly to fail. And through that, you build the grit and the resilience and the coping skills and the problem-solving skills necessary to literally be independent. It's critical, and we're seeing in the absence of childhood and play that we have gone into sort of a mental health crisis with our young children. So, the question is, how do we change things? Because in today's society, it is really tough to say, I'm just going to let my kids play, because most of us are on the treadmill or on the other side of it. We're in families where we don't have the time, the finances, or the space to engage in play. I'm in a more affluent suburb where we have the support systems to, if we choose to, allow our kids to play. But I was talking to a group of parents last week, and they basically said very angrily, we don't have the time, we don't have the time to play with our kids and spend with our kids, we don't have the money to spend on buying tools for our kids, and we don't have the space to send our kids outside because our neighborhoods are violent. Like, how do you expect us to do this? And so it was really profound, and it made me think sort of about the whole message, and I wrote a list of 20 ways to engage with your child if you have limited time, space, or money. Thinking about those folks, the majority of folks in our world who really don't have those resources. And some of them are very simple. Telling stories to your kids. Anytime I want to get my kids off technology, I say, do you want mommy to tell you about something really bad she did when she was a kid? And literally, they come running. In fact, I had to start making up stories because I wasn't really that bad.
Send them to me, I can tell
But
them some
every
stories.
night, literally, they were like, tell me another. So I started to read the newspaper. I was like, what did other people do that was bad? But truly, telling stories about your childhood can be such a way to engage with your kids. You know, simple things like cards. One deck of cards might be the best investment you can ever make. I mean, we played magic tricks, learned how to shuffle, played solitaire, played, you know, blackjack, played so many innumerable games with that one deck of cards, making paper airplanes and flying them. So anyway, there's so many simple things. I mean, the other one's playing catch with a ball. We literally play catch with a ball, trying not to drop it, and continue for months on end, getting to, I think our record is like 13,000 catches.
Wow.
But the point is, it is possible. It's just hard work. And I think for all of you to make a list of the simple things you can do to engage with your child, and when you reach those moments like, I feel like we're not connecting or they're on technology, pull that out and go down them. And you know, they may say no to 19 of them, but maybe the 20th will be just that little spark to ignite that imagination.
Can I jump in really fast?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the thing that I appreciate the most about what you said, and I really want to highlight, is that I think we forget that play is a child's language.
Absolutely, yes.
Play is how children communicate. And I think when we strip them of the opportunity to do that, we remove their communication. I think the other thing that's sort of related to you said is I think we have made it too complicated. You know, they have to have all of these gadgets and they have to have all of these things. And oftentimes what the kids want is they just want you, right? They just want you to sit down and listen, to show them that they matter, to do things that are simple and not complicated, to do things that prioritize them. And I think we're just spending a lot of time preparing our children to be adults and missing in the opportunity for them to just be kids.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah.
Can I toss in a book that I think is fabulous for that? And it's always with the books with me. It's a book called Not a Box, and it's just a box. It's this character where there's just a box, and it's just like all the things they do with the box, and it's just right to the heart of that. So it's a wonderful book.
That's great. I mean, the idea for the children's museum, any children's museums, is the power of play. But it's not just play for fun, but it's also play to inspire things like risk-taking and problem-solving. And one of the things we notice at our children's museum is many times parents will come in, they'll scan the room, and they're like, you know, they don't want to allow the child to take the lead. Our intention is that it's a place for the child to take the lead, and it's a child-centered environment, and you really have to get the parent to take a step back and just let the child go. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of that where the parent's really controlling the situation, and our play workers come in and say, just let him try that a little and see. And then 3 hours later, they're ready to go, but, you know.
Yeah, and I think then when we think about that, and I know we're getting ready to head there pretty soon, but I think sort of jumping in front of children and blocking, again, the ability to do the thing that is natural for them to do, in some ways induces anxiety and induces sort of, you know, this worry and this, am I doing this right, that has later complications that I know we'll talk about later, but we just need to get out of our kids' way.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah.
You know, I think part of it is that we as adults have forgotten how to play ourselves. And I think the world has become so scary, and we're so burdened with 24/7 news cycle and getting our kids prepared for college and kindergarten and everything that is on our minds, that we've actually forgotten how to access what brings us joy ourselves. So how can we appreciate it, as we started, how can we appreciate what our kids find joyful when we have lost sight of what brings us joy ourselves? Yeah. So part of what we are trying to do as a company is talk about play, not only starting in childhood, but then once you grab hold of what brings you joy, whatever that is, you better not lose sight of it your entire life, because then you will not appreciate it in your children either.
Yeah, that's
You know, I'm going to jump on there too.
Sure.
One of the things that I've noticed in the classroom, we introduced chess at 4th grade. And it's amazing, a lot of children that struggle with attention, that supposedly have problems with attention, are suddenly paying attention when they have to think a few moves ahead and are fascinated by a game. We've really replaced this board game world that we lived in the 1960s and 70s with a lot of technology, okay? And it started in the 1980s, but it's really becoming a trend that we play things electronically now, and they're very, very fast-paced, they're very colorful, they're very addicting. And what it initially causes is almost like a learned inattention. And a lot of that can be cured by going back to that simplicity of play, of the patience of waiting your turn, different things like that, and thinking before you move. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I think that's a great, you're absolutely correct. And we see it in the classroom as well. We see it in the class, oh yeah, and we see it in the classroom as well. So, yeah.
So following up on something that maybe you said about fear and adults getting in their own way of their kids, because you are worried, it is a scary world. So, and I think parents naturally want to protect their children. I sort of fall into the definitely worrying camp. But when does that cross the line into what people are calling helicoptering or lawn mowering? And is that really so bad? And are we thwarting our kids' independence and risk-taking? I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, one of the things that I always do is I start with empathy. And I start with trying to empathize with parents and caregivers that usually the intentions are good, right? We want our kids to be safe, we want them to be happy, we want them to, you know, be fully functioning adults. And at the same time, it is also possible for us, I think, when we get into some of this lawn mowing and all of that kind of helicopter parenting, all of that kind of business, is that I think not only does it do the thing that you mentioned, which is get in the way of their ability to take risks and make mistakes, I think we unwittingly communicate to our children that we don't trust that they're capable. I think there's that thing.
That's good.
Oh, I got like a fan for that one. Somebody's like, yes, that is it. I think the other thing is we promote unsafety in the world because it's, I got to get in front of this because it's, you know, I got to protect you from this thing. But then I think where we see it clinically is in 3 key ways. So in terms of cognitive development, what we see is that when parents and caregivers get in the way of children acting autonomously and kind of making decisions, it keeps them or strips them from their ability to problem solve and to sort of think through solutions and make some decisions based off of that kind of problem solving skill. And so I think it's important for us to understand that cognitive development is then hindered when we kind of intervene in ways that might be a bit premature, because problem solving and decision making is indeed a developmental skill that children need to develop to grow into fully functioning adults. I think the second way that we see this sort of intervening affect children is in terms of affective expression. And by that I mean healthy feelings. And so when we protect, and I think Christopher, you spoke to this earlier. By the way, I'm just like over here like, yes, I see why he's Teacher of the Year. He's amazing. I wish I had you as a teacher.
I'm saying the same thing about you.
Oh, you're amazing. It gets in the way of children being able to have healthy expression of feelings. And so when we block them, we keep them from being able to have uncomfortable feelings and to be able to manage them in ways and know, okay, this feels uncomfortable, but I'm not gonna die from it, right? Or this feels uncomfortable, I don't like it, but I'm gonna be okay. And so I think it's important to understand that, secondly, the affective expression is also hindered. And then the last thing I would say is it also affects the behavior and what they do. So not only do they not take risks and avoid mistakes, but they also don't act in ways that are autonomous and independent, and they don't engage in some of that critical thinking behavior, if you will. And again, all of those things are developmentally appropriate. And so what I would say to you all is, yes, you are likely making the decision because you want your children to be safe and protected, but also know that if you can do that and promote healthy development by allowing children to figure it out and solve problems. They can do it, they're capable. But if we get in the way, we're telling them that they're not capable.
Yeah.
I think one other thing that gets stifled through the helicopter parenting, and was and still am a helicopter parent, so I can speak to it very poignantly, but it's emotional relationships with others. And I don't know if any of you know about sort of what's happening on college campuses with sort of safe spaces and people's inability to really talk through issues. You know, what happens today, we've created such a sanitized environment throughout school where if you have an issue or if anybody is talking to you negatively, and again, there are issues, of course, that need, you know, parental involvement or teacher involvement, but most cooperative play, social play, is not very kind. When you look at little kids playing in preschool, it's really mean. It's a lot of biting and scratching and name calling and hitting and throwing, and that actually is so healthy because that's the way we learn how to empathize with other people, how to compromise, how to negotiate, how to solve problems, and things that are critical for, you know, development. And what's happening now is because we're sanitizing those environments so much, and when kids start to altercate, we're jumping in and saying, oh no, you can't say that to him or her, and we're pulling them apart and not allowing those feelings to be expressed and exposed. We're hampering kids' ability to become adults that can have real relationships. So what's happening in college, there have been many cases now where kids are entering college and suddenly they're put in a room with a roommate that they've never met and disagreeing about something, and instead of being able to intelligently and maturely talk it out, they're running to their parent or they're running to the administration or they're running to counseling with panic attacks saying, my roommate said something mean to me, because they literally, it's crazy, but they literally haven't developed the skills to be able to effectively solve problems with other people. And that is tragic, because and might be one of the reasons we're having so much, you know, latent animosity now, because we never learned how to truly empathize and talk to each other as children in this entire generation.
So Christopher, what do you think about that as a teacher?
You know, I agree with everything both of you are saying. The helicopter parent, I think, goes in with good intentions. That we all want to protect. You know, I have 3 children. I want to protect my children. Of course, I want to protect my children. But am I protecting my children in the long run or the short term? You know, and that's the most important thing to do, is to look out for that future, that lifelong learner right there, and to have experiences of, you know, where things don't go well and letting them work through it or coaching them through it. I think that's most important. But I would actually flip the question a little bit. The helicopter parent, this question, I've been a teacher for 24 years, and this question would have been very relevant quite a few years ago. To me, the more relevant question is, right now, I've seen a trend. And it went from parents struggling at home to divorced parents to single mom raising the kid to mom now not with the kid to grandma and grandpa are now raising the kid that struggled to raise their kids. So really the helicopter parent is not the main problem I'm facing in my classrooms now, or my classroom nowadays. The biggest fear that I have is the child that has nobody. And that's really the reality of it right now. Mike, I told you I have 40 children. 6 of those children in my classroom currently do not have a single parent at home. They're either being raised by an aunt, a caregiver, a foster care person, or a grandparent. So what do I do about it? Now let's take a positive spin on this, because you can complain all we want about this, or we can do something about it. Back in the late 1990s, there was a great study put out by the Search Institute. The Search Institute, it's very easy to Google it. Google knows everything, so you can probably find it there somewhere. And but look up the 40 developmental assets. Right now, the big buzzword in education is the 10 ACEs, the negatives we have in our lives. And if you have 4 ACEs or 5 ACEs, you're most likely not to really grow up well. Well, let's flip that and go to what do we need to put into children's lives that helps them become successful contributors to our communities later on. And when I say successful, I don't mean money, I don't mean necessarily living a conventional life. I mean living a healthy, happy life. But please look up the 40 developmental assets, and they're broken up into 40 intrinsic assets, 40 extrinsic assets. And they're simple things. And if you look at the child in school, especially those ones that have challenging homes, look at the list, and I bet you can pinpoint 2 or 3 things on that list that you can do extra to individualize that education for that child that will help them grow into the successful life they deserve. Remember, we only get one life. We've got to make the most of it. The greatest question I get every year, and I laugh at it, how's your year going? Are you kidding me? I'm having the best year of my life. It's great. You know why? Because these kids are never going to get another shot at 4th grade again, right? Yeah. So I have to make it the best year ever, right? So I've got to find each individual thing, and especially for those ones right now that truly have nothing. Ask yourself right now, the negativity in the news, the violence issues that we hear in the news. We keep hearing, wow, they were such a bright person. They were such an intelligent person. Well, yes, but what was missing there? This developmental assets list, if you take the time to look at it, please do. Because you'll start to see a trend of little things that we can put into children's lives to help them become happy and successful.
And could I add to that that doesn't necessarily always have to come from the caregiver or the teacher. It can be from any of those ancillary people in that in that child's realm. And so often, and again, I'm all the book, always book, but school librarians play an enormous role in kids' lives, because if they are aware of what's going on with the kid, they can find that book that can rescue a kid. And I can't tell you the number of people I meet as, adults who are writing books, making books, doing all kinds of amazing things, and their lives were entirely changed by the teacher, the parent, the school librarian, or the public librarian who said, I think this might help you. I see you, first of all, and also I think this book might help you to find things. So
the power of one is important. I was sharing with colleagues last night. We were just kind of connecting last night in the reception, and I was one of those students. I was the student who was gifted, but I was struggling. I had, my mother was experiencing domestic violence in the home. I was the oldest of 3 girls, and so I was the one breaking up fights and calling the police, and missing days at school because I didn't know if my mom was going to be alive when I came home. And it was the school counselor who saw me. Yeah. She was the one who said, she's smart, but she's struggling. Something's going on. And reached out to me, invited me for a session, and then eventually invited my mom and said, how can I support you? Your daughter's smart, but she's struggling. What's going on? And so, full circle now, I get to do that in my work. But the power of one person, right? Being able to use your window of opportunity to show up for someone. And so, I think it's just incredible to think about things in that way. That it can be you as caregivers, but also it can also be other people who just show up and see that child.
I'll give a great example of that. My parents divorced when I was in 6th grade, and there was a custodian at school named Buzzy, and we live on the Erie Canal. I grew up in Fairport, New York, and I went fishing every Saturday morning faithfully at 6 in the morning with Buzzy the custodian to fish for these slimy carp. We didn't, I had my own 5-gallon bucket that I'd turn upside down. I'd sit next to Buzzy. I don't even recall a conversation we had. But that man, you're right, it does not necessarily have to be the teacher or anything. That person is there for you. For some odd reason, they gave me that one little thing, or Buzzy gave me that one little thing that was so special at the time that I really needed it. You're so right.
Thank you. Well, kind of following up, I wanted to ask you about, I want to talk about real world, addressing the real world situations. And it's just starting with one of your books, and I hope it's out on the shelves there. It's called The Big Project Book for Amazing Architects, and you also have one for Rosie Revere, right?
And also for Ada Twist.
These are really amazing, these books. I mean, the activities that you've put together in those books are wonderful, but I noticed that one of the activities is called Real World, in which you ask kids to think about problems like natural and man-made disasters, and then you ask the child to draw a shelter that the family can find refuge in, and that just seems really intense because your readers are pretty young. So what's your thinking about introducing kind of those scary things in that way?
Well, I think, first of all, kids are not ignorant of, nor are they immune to the world. Every kid, if you walk down any street here in the city and you're walking along, as an adult, we might notice a couple of people who maybe are homeless. The kid will notice 7 people. They'll notice the mom who has got the kid a little bit too hard by the hand and the kid is crying. They'll notice the dog that doesn't have a collar. Where's that dog going? They see everything. They notice everything. They are affected by everything. And so we tend to think that kids aren't capable, but back to what you were saying, kids are capable of so much. So it's not that they are not aware of things. If any kid lived anywhere in North Carolina, they got rained on a couple of weeks ago when that hurricane came. They probably knew families who had to leave because of the flooding. If they live in California, they have smelled the smoke of those fires. They walk down the street, they'll see a newspaper and they'll see like, oh, they're refugees, what's going on? So it's not that they don't see things. So it's our job to help them to process things. So we can do that by not processing, not recognizing, not engaging in any way, and that, I think, just builds fear. It must be so bad, there's nothing anyone could do, and that they internalize that terror. And kids also take everything personally and as their own fault, no matter what it is. So for them, that's suddenly like, that's really scary. But we can also say, you maybe can't solve the whole problem, but you can do one thing to help one person. So it's pretty easy, and kids want to be asked. They deserve to be asked. Kids are smart and tough and capable, and when we recognize that and we give them credit and do it in an appropriate and age-appropriate way, like they will rise to the task, and they'll feel empowered because we ask them. So, you know, a first grader isn't going to solve the incredible impending refugee crisis that's going to happen because of climate change. One first grader is probably not going to solve that. You know what? 100,000 first graders are not going to solve that problem. But for those 100,000 first graders, if they revisit that problem as second grade and third grade and fifth grade and ninth grade over a long time, those kids are going to solve that problem. And not for nothing, we have enormous impending problems on this planet because of the cowardice of my generation, because we have not been brave enough to say, oh, we got some problems we have to get to. We are shuffling those off to the next kids, and they are the ones who are going to have to deal full on. So we can either help them understand and feel empowered, and in small, bite-sized ways that are age-appropriate and reasonable and can actually be a fun activity in a workbook, you know, in as much as flooding is never good. But, so don't try that at home either. Yeah, kids can do so much. We tend to think of kids as not real people. They're like, oh, they're cute, they're just lovely, but they are real people, and they feel everything with all of the passion and the power and the intensity that we feel. And so we just kind of, our job is to help show them the way forward with that.
Yeah. And what do you think about so these are fearful situations, flooding, a refugee crisis, everything you're talking about, and real world, just to give you some personal information, the real world came to my home in the form of my daughter was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was 16, and she's now in remission, but that was quite frightening, and I say it to honor her bravery, but I was traumatized as a mom. So how does a parent control their fear so they're not creating a fearful child? And how do you help your child who does seem like a fearful, anxious child? So,
Yeah, so, I go back to what I said earlier insofar as, and I think many of us have said this, the importance of us as caregivers first modeling how to handle these situations. Kids are watching us. They're watching us in terms of the way that we think and how we feel and the things that we're doing. And so they need to see us. They need to be able to see us have difficult moments, have uncertain moments, have traumatic or crisis moments, and get through it, I think, first and foremost. I think the other thing is it's important for parents and caregivers, you all, me, folks up here who also have children, to normalize their reactions, right? So it is normal, it is typical for you to be frightened or afraid or uncertain or, whatever the feelings are, and not shame them for having feelings. I was sort of, again, in conversation last night, recalling growing up in my home and certainly in certain communities where expressions of crying and any expression of vulnerability was shut down. Why are you crying? Stop crying. Don't cry. And I'm a crier. Like, I might not look like I'm a crier, but I can get a good crying. Because for me, it's cathartic, and I think crying is healing and healthy. But, when I think about my own experience with my mom, she didn't cry much, right? And so there was this sort of direct and implicit message around crying and vulnerability is bad, shameful, so on and so forth. So to the point that I was making, it's important for us as caregivers to normalize that feelings are normal, they are appropriate, they are welcomed. I think related to that, it's important for us to teach children how to then, if we're going to normalize it, to then teach them how to cope with things that are uncertain, right? So teaching them things that are relaxing and soothing and self-regulating. In other words, kind of going back to a lot of what we said before, kids have the tools, right? They are not just, I think it was you, Andrea, they're like, what are these? They're people, right? They're just little people, but they have all the things that we have, well, except the part of their brain that's rational until they turn 25, but they have everything else. So teaching them tools for how to regulate their emotions, right? Deep breathing, meditation, all things that they can do. And then finally, the thing that I'd like to encourage you all is that if you find that your young person, your little person, the level of anxiety or fear or worry is impairing, in other words, it's getting in the way of them doing daily tasks, basic functions, don't be afraid to find your little person a professional counselor, right? A licensed professional counselor who works with children and adolescents, who uses evidence-based practices specifically for children, like play therapy. And so, again, the last piece of that is do not be afraid. If everything else is failed, right? If you're teaching and modeling and supporting and encouraging and normalizing, if none of that's working and your young person is still experiencing distress, do not be afraid to get them the help that they need.
Yes. Can I toss out a couple of books again?
You got a book for that too?
I do. I do. There's a book for everything. I'm telling you,
you are
for
prolific.
Everything. There's a wonderful series of books by Susan Verde, V-E-R-D-E, and Peter Reynolds, who's just like a national treasure, called I Am Peace, I Am Yoga. They have a new one, I'm forgetting the name of it, but they are also to help kids get centered and to find that calm in a very tumultuous world that we live in. So yes. Oh, there's a book for everything.
Yes, there is. You're right.
All right, I'm going to take us off sad and scary stuff, but I had a question about, I'm sure everyone's thought about this, the girls, boys, gender differences, and I was reading an article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago called The Confidence Gap in Girls. It talked about how the confidence level in girls goes down between the ages of 8 and 14 by 30%. Boys generally stay the same. So this is really for everybody, but I'll start with you. Are you cognizant of that when you're writing books? Because Ada Twist and Rosie Revere are on equal footing.
And my books I didn't set out to write books that really address that, but they have found a welcome home because that is the reality, that there are girls do have this confidence gap, and it actually starts much, much younger than that. And I think, and I've thought a lot about this and read a lot of research, and I think that the thing that we do with girls is we talk to them differently and we have different expectations of them. And so by that I mean that early, like we focus on emotional words with girls and we focus on how they look. And I even found myself doing that. And I think of myself as a feminist in a big way. And, but I would notice that I would do book signings and I would have, a long line of kids come up, and when the little girls would come up and say, oh, isn't that a cute dress? Isn't that a cute pair of shoes? Well, who cares what your shoes look like? That does not matter. So I have tried very hard to change how I talk to girls now and to make it the same as I talk to boys. And I now ask every kid the same question. When they come up to me, no matter how old they are and no matter who they are, I ask them, what do you make? And I will tell you, every kid has something they make. And when you ask them that, they are taken a little bit like, what? And the pride they find and the power they have of, I make pictures of blue trucks. That was a girl a couple of weeks ago. I make pictures of blue trucks. I'm rather an expert at it. And I said, do you ever make red trucks? And she looked at me like I had 3 heads, because no, who would do that? That's nuts.
Right.
But it's this empowerment of what I see that you do something that you care deeply about. And when you acknowledge that, that gives them the strength of, yeah, this is important. I am important. And so that's what you do. And also, but I do have to say, if they wear a Doctor Who shirt, we will have the conversation. I don't care who you are. Then we have to talk.
And what about like toys? Do you design anything differently for boys and girls, or do you keep a confidence gap in mind?
That's a great question. I would say 30 years ago, we definitely gender stereotyped and did pink and blue and really felt like that was sort of the way things were going. But in the act of raising children, I completely changed, because I saw just in nurturing alone, which, traditionally, I guess you might say, was a female role. My boys are much more nurturing than my girls. And it really made me see everything entirely differently. And I'm so proud that we have completely changed. And today, we're coming out with a new baby care line, which we would have called doll care years ago. But now we're calling it baby care, and it's completely gender neutral. It has boys, girls, both holding babies, both holding stuffed animals. And, it's really the reality, because the truth is everyone's the same, and there shouldn't be a stigma against one, or a certain bias for one or the other.
That's great. Do you see it in the classroom?
I do. And a very eye-opening incident happened in the spring. We were studying the amendments of the Constitution. We got to the 19th Amendment. Of course, that's passed in 1920. And one of the girls in the class says, it says 1918 New York here. And I said, oh, don't you realize we're in the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in New York State? How many people realize this year in our state of New York, right here, that it's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage? Not many. We've lost our history, and we need to go back to making sure that women and men in all cultures and everything is represented through the way we teach our history, because our history is rich with men and women. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to comment?
I just wanted to chime in about just sort of gender differences and understanding how girls are impacted differently. And I think a couple of different ways. So when we think about girls in particular, I think there's a couple of things. And I'm thinking about children in the developmental stage for this particular conference. So developmentally, we're talking about girls middle childhood to early adolescence in terms of development. It's critical to see what's happening with them. So biologically, in that developmental stage, we have the onset of puberty likely taking place. So there's hormonal changes, there's sort of inward and outward, right? And you have, related to that, oftentimes girls are not talked too educated about what's happening with their bodies. And so then that leads to psychological challenges in terms of anxiety and depression, because there are these things that are happening with their bodies that we don't really know what's going on. And then also psychosocially, what's happening to girls in those spaces is that girls typically, so I agree with you, I think we need to be careful in terms of gender roles and making sure that we draw hard lines there, because I think that leads to challenges. But I think in terms of psychosocially, girls tend to be more relational and more apt to negotiate peer relationships. You know, the friendships are all very important. And if girls are experiencing rejection in those moments, it could lead to, again, depression, anxiety. But then there's that whole beauty thing, right? It's how you look at that moment. And again, if you're not a young girl whose physical appearance is considered beautiful, if you're not thin, you know, all of these different issues also lead to challenges in peer relationships that, again, lead to depression and anxiety. So it is very critical how we talk to our girls. It is very critical in terms of how we empower them and let them know that they're valuable, not because of how they look, but because of just who they are. Because again, it just, you know, it leads to later complications down the road.
I appreciate that. So we've actually run out of time, but I'm going to go over just a minute, sorry, because I could sit and talk to you and listen to your thoughts and advice for another hour, but I want to wrap up for everybody, kind of if each of you could just give us a parting thought about what would be your idea about raising a child who's at home in the world based on everything we've talked about today. Do you want to start?
Sure. Find people who can give you advice. Like, you're not in it alone. This is not every child has a lot of people in their worlds. And make some of those people knowledgeable people about books, because no matter what the situation, someone has written a really fantastic, great book about it. They truly have, and you'll save yourself a lot of time if you just read the books.
Thank you. Christopher, what do you think?
It's true, though.
I love you. Isn't she a wonderful person? Yes. Oh my gosh. You know, I think we have to balance. I'm a teacher, so I have to balance standards, and we're very standards laden right now and curriculum laden, but we have to balance that along with what everybody's interested. Everybody is an individual, so what every child has a specific interest. You mentioned, that question of, what do you make?
Right.
Is a great question, because we want to find out what each child is capable of and what each child is interested in. But then the art of teaching is, how do you balance that with a standard? So I would say, don't go so heavy on the standards and curriculum that you don't allow for that flexibility of each individual in your classroom.
Mm-hmm. I think there are two components to feeling like you belong and you're at home in the world, and they both revolve around meaning. One is finding meaningful connections that allow you to feel that you're accepted and loved by those around you. And the second is engaging in meaningful pursuits. It means finding your purpose and your passion and engaging in it every single day. And both of those can be accessed through play. And truly, if we allowed our children to have a childhood and play more, there would be more people who felt like they belonged in the world.
Yeah. I think the thing that I would just sort of close with in saying to each of you is that making sure that your children understand, no matter who they are, no matter who they are not, no matter what the world tells them, that they are enough.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you. So we're finished for the day. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you so much.
It's really a pleasure. That was great.
That was beautiful.
You guys are wonderful.
You guys, oh my gosh.
You guys were awesome.
I'm going to announce raffle winners, so you don't want to leave, because you could have won something from the raffle. So here are the names. If I call your name, all of the raffles for children's clothes You can go to the registration desk and they will give you it there. So our winners are Sherry Dumanel, Samantha Knopf, Kevin McCleary, and Bridget Pineda. So if I called your name, there's some stuff waiting for you. We are going to move into our breakout sessions. On the back of your name tag, you have 2 stickers. The first one is your first breakout session, and for the second one, you will be guided in. Between now and then, you have a 10-minute break, so enjoy.